Mr. Edit Man presents, what's the coolest thing your dad did where you knew what he was doing and he said never tell mom? When I was a kid, my dad regularly sabotaged our stove so that we would be forced to go out to eat at a restaurant. We loved Pizza Inn, and my mom always nagged that we needed to eat something green. My mom knew squat about anything electrical, mechanical, etc. Sometimes dad flipped the switch in the circuit box, or anything else he could think of to make the stove non-functional. To this day, my mom still thinks the stove we had in the 90s was a flaky, intermittently faulty piece of malarkey before we got a new one when I was in high school. By that time, family dinners were a no-go anyway due to everyone's schedules, so we no longer had to deal with the tampering of the kitchen. Now 23, I have still never told mom. I grew up in a fairly rural area with lots of winter, and when my sister and I were little, my dad would take us off-roading in snowy fields, doing donuts and the like with his Suzuki Samurai. One day, he stopped in the middle of a field and got out of the car. Out came a sled and some rope. He tied one end to the sled and the other end to the bumper, and with a gleam in his eye, said "Do not tell mom. .. He then proceeded to tow us around the field at fairly high speed doing big figure eights and circles in the powdery snow. So awesome. When we were doing construction on our house, my dad ended up getting into a huge argument with my mom over the position of a wall. She wanted a larger closet, but he was insistent that it would make the adjacent bathroom too small. He finally gave in and put the wall where she wanted it. The next day, when she was at work, he took the day off, knocked out the wall with my uncle, and moved it to where he had wanted to put it originally. Mom never found out. During the Nintendo years, I had a strict early bedtime along with my younger siblings. Except on the nights when my mom worked. On those nights, I would be allowed to sneak past my sleeping brother and sister and go downstairs to play Nintendo with my dad until we heard the garage door opening, signaling my mom's return home. At that point, I had to run back to bed and pretend I was sleeping. It was awesome. My dad would show up midday Friday at elementary school and tell the teacher I had an appointment or something. We'd actually go fishing for the rest of the day. When I was young, 6 or so, I broke my mom's hairdryer to get the electric motor to make a hovercraft boat thing. My mom got really pissed at me. She told my dad, and he scolded me a little. But later, when she was not watching, he gave me a bucket full of used or broken electronic things, filled with all the motors, wires and parts I could dream of. Still working well, if you knew how to use them. He said knock yourself out, and gave me a big smile. He also gave me a bunch of batteries. He's an electronic engineer, so I guess he was very proud. My dad used to smuggle contraband items into Liberia. To this day, I always thought that was kind of cool. I have no idea if my mom knows, but who cares. When I was 13, my dad let me drive his 84 Cadillac Eldorado about 12 miles home from some family event we had. He sat in the passenger seat, and I drove the whole way home. He prefaced asking me if I wanted to drive home by saying, "I saw you playing pole position, and you do pretty well. Want to drive the car home?" I could hardly contain myself. 3 towns later, a traffic circle and many intersections and turns. I'm putting the car in park in our driveway and my dad is beaming. He looks over and says, "Great job, bud. You might want to wait to tell mom about this." I paused for a second as it sunk in and gave him a big knowing smile. I waited 19 years to tell my mom. My father had recently come into possession of an Nissan Z32, and I was invited along when he decided to take it for a spin. At the ripe old age of 6, I had never been in a sports car before, at least as far as I could remember. As we cruised down the highway, I asked my father what makes it a sports car. Anyway, I suddenly found myself sinking into the passenger seat as the speedometer easily climbed past 100 miles per hour. After we returned to a sane highway speed, he turned to me and said, "Do not tell your mother we did that." A few years ago, when my dad bought his Corvette, he did the exact same thing. I asked him, "So you like it?" And his response was basically a dab. See, foot to the floor, of throttle. It was awesome. I have been a car guy since that moment. This one time, my older brother and I got woken up by my dad at 4 in the morning. Oops. "Hey, guys, we have had season tickets to Six Flags Magic Mountain, and we still haven't not used them. Let's go. Do not tell mom." So we quietly got up, snuck out of the house, into the car, and drove the 6-hour drive down to Southern California. We rode roller coasters all day, then drove home and got back around midnight. My dad's awesome. D. gave me my first real video game. Doom. Malarkey gave me nightmares, but was way too fun. My dad never cursed around our family when I was a kid. My friends still joke that you knew he was pissed when he called you a knucklehead. Anyway, my dad owns a restaurant, and one day, after he picked me up from school, he got a call from one of his cooks that the prep work for a party that night had not gotten done. He let loose a string of profanity that, to this day, I haven't not heard duplicated. He turned to me and said, sometimes language like that is appropriate. That does not mean anyone needs to know about it. My dad almost crashed his motorcycle on a really beautiful country road he discovered just going too fast. Took a corner too sharp and almost had to drop the bike. The next time he and I were out for a ride, he said, "Do not tell your mother about this, but ... want to see where I almost died last week? One of my do not tell mother moments ... My father and I have rebuilt 5 or 6 old 70s/80s Honda ATCs, all-terrain cycles, 3-wheelers, 3-wheeled death traps. This is probably the 3rd or 4th one that we had to pull start. We would buy them for malarkey prices because they did not run at all. Usually it was just a bad carburetor or kickstart. Well, I was pull starting him one day. I was on a Workhorse 250SX, shaft driven, and he was on a 350X. It took us forever to pull start it, about a quarter mile till he got it. At that point we were on a downhill curve. He was giving it full throttle in 2nd gear when it started. The chain from my rear hitch connected to his front forks wrapped up in his front tire, since we were on a downhill turn, and his front tire was tied up with 3 loops of chain ... He ain't not the asphalt. He was knocked out cold for about 3 minutes. I could not wake him up by slapping him in the face or screaming as hard as I could. I ran to our closest neighbor's house, just at the beginning of the downhill turn, to their front door then to their back door, screaming/beating/punching their doors. Noon was home, ran back and slapped and screamed at him a few more times, and then he woke up. He was fully coherent and knew exactly what we were doing and what had happened. We wound the chain from his front forks and wrapped them on my rear rack. Went back home. He soaked a few shop clothes with blood from his temple, had a few more beers while we listened to some Lynyrd Skynyrd. Said to me, "Do not tell her about this." We haven't not talked about it to this day. Almost a decade. To sum it up, I almost killed my dad when I was 12. We haven't not talked about it, and she does not know. Dad put a 12-foot ladder on the hood of his car, a Volvo, and had me and my younger brother steady it while he climbed up to get a tennis ball out of the gutter. My class was going on a trip to medieval times and I did not get my permission slip signed to go because I did not care for medieval times. I had a bad experience. So, realizing that if I went to school that day I would be all alone in a classroom working, my dad devised a plan. He told me to get in the car and that we were gonna go somewhere fun. Turned out it was the opening day of The Matrix Reloaded and I was 13. We watched the movie, and then we went out, and he bought me Enter the Matrix for GamerCube. I know a lot of people are going to say I cannot believe you passed up medieval times for a Matrix sequel and a crappy game. But believe me, it was worth it, because it was worth both things, spending time with my dad. My dad said that, if my stepmother beat him in a game of bowling, he would buy me Pokemon Gold. He sabotaged his own game so well no one could tell, and I love that game. I'm sure he's still telling himself that. My brother, dad and I were disc golfing at our local course, inside city limits, and my brother decides to shoot off about $200 worth of fireworks. Turns out the show and sounds were so loud that some of the city softball games stopped to admire. We saw a cop car pull up and immediately my dad picks the 2 of us up and sprints about a mile to the softball games and we blend into the crowd. This is my favorite never tell mom story. One day my dad walked into my kitchen wielding some bloody paper towels, a pair of pliers, and a recently dislodged tooth in his hand. Do not tell mom. Easily the most hardcore thing he has ever done. I was around 12. My brother was 10. We're sitting in the basement watching television when my father comes down and proclaims that he has a movie that we're going to love. He says it's called A Clockwork Orange. We're game. He throws a VHS into the player and about a minute in my mother walks down, sees the television, and yells no, no, absolutely not. She grabs it out of the VCR and says, "I'm going to bed, and I'm taking this with me." My brother and I signed ejection, and my father follows suit. My mother goes upstairs. We slide off the couch to go elsewhere when my father says, "Wait, not so fast," and from under his sweater pulls out another copy. I planned for this. Don, not tell your mother. Now, I do not know if any of you have seen this movie. I think it's sort of obscure. Without going into detail, my mother, as it turns out, was probably justified in trying to keep us from watching it. He woke me up throwing a ball of black clothing at me at 3 AM one night, then had me break into the local dry cleaners via being dropped into the big mail slot for dirty suits. He had a bunch of company shirts for his sales team that were flying out early the next morning to some expo before the cleaners opened there and unlocking the door for him. Of course he left a note and sufficient funds plus some. He was later arrested, though I believe everything was sorted out somehow. AHH. Dad. My sister was getting married. My 14-year-old brother, at the time, had drank himself stupid the night of the party. Next day dad drives 2 hours in the wrong direction to the airport while brother throws up all over the back of the rental car, not wanting to stop. He drives 90 miles per hour to make the flight, leaving the backseat of the rental car covered in newspaper, saying mom does not hear about this for 5 years / made the flight waited 5 years. This was more of just a fun prank. My mom had just gotten a new license in the mail. Before she saw it, my dad and I covered her picture with one of her that water had dropped on. The replacement picture was all warped and made her look like a monster. He told me not to say anything. It was hilarious when she opened that envelope, but she freaked out and I felt really bad, so I confessed. You have made it until the end of this video. Now listen here and listen here closely. Like and subscribe for more curated content from Mr. Edit Man. Thanks for watching.